Morning, Justin. I hope he's watching. If not, I'm going to have to scold him later on. In case you don't know me, I'm Terry Balding. That's the way I always introduce myself. And I would like to begin this morning with a prayer. Our Father in heaven, you know what I want to accomplish this day. But Lord, it's not what I want, it's what you want. And I know that each person out here has a certain need. I just pray you will use me as your mouthpiece and funnel your thoughts through my words, that each person might hear exactly what they need to hear today, not necessarily what I had in mind. Thank you, Lord, for hearing this prayer, and I ask you to be with me. I pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. Well, this morning, I wanted to tell you about this sermon. First off, I thought about this thing like a year ago and kept thinking about it. Finally, one of the elders asked me, would you like to preach? I said, yeah, I got this sermon I've had in mind. So I want you to know this was not tailored just for you. Somebody's going to say, well, he's talking about me. No, it's just everybody. I'm not especially picking on anyone. And second, some of the material I've had is something I've had before. So some of you are going to be bored, but others of you are newer. Well, find this all fresh, new material. I'd like to have the first slide. My son was jogging around this lake. It's a mile around. He jogs around 4 to 6 times each day. And as he was jogging around it, he thought, that's really nice. Still frozen over, though. Pretty much. And he took the picture. And he ran around to the other side. Next slide. He said, whoa, wait a minute. The ice is mostly gone. So you see, it depends upon your perspective. Okay? Well, today I want to give you a run-through of my life. It's a testimonial. And I want it to be my perspective on what I saw with my life. You remember that I shared this with some of you before, that my daughter is in a 4-H group. And each year they have students from foreign countries come and stay with them for a week or so. And then we send people over to their country. Well, that one summer, my daughter had a Japanese girl that came over. And perhaps you don't realize this, but even here in Wisconsin, in Eau Claire, we cannot see the Milky Way. There's too much light from the city. You have to go farther north, away from cities, to be able to see the Milky Way. But even farther south, it doesn't matter if you're even around the city. Even out in the country, you still can't see the Milky Way. Most people in the United States cannot see the Milky Way. Japan, they never see it because of the industrial smog. So the Japanese girl wanted to see the stars for her first time. She walked out onto the deck with my daughter's family. She looked up at the stars, and this is what she said. Now I know there's a God. Amen. We need, each one of us, during the course of the summers and the winters, to look up at the stars and just contemplate that a little bit. And I think your perspective will be, there is a God. Also in 2 Kings, we find that there was a great warrior. His name was Nahum. And Nahum had leprosy. And he tried everything to get the leprosy to go away. But it wouldn't. Finally, one of his slave girls was a Jew. And she said, I know a prophet from Israel who can cure your leprosy. Yeah, go and try it. His aide said, go and try it. What's it going to hurt? So he went to the land of Israel, to see the prophet. And the prophet said, well, just go on down by the river and dump in the Jordan River and he'll be cured. He said, why wouldn't he send the prophet come out to meet me? He didn't even come out and meet me. He just sent his aide. I'm an important person here. And dirty old Jordan, what would be special about the dirty old Jordan? And he was going to go back home. But his aide said, oh, no, well, you go ahead and try it. And he did. And he was cured. And from his perspective, this is what he said. Now I know there is no God but the God of Hebrews. So I wanted to share this morning a couple things to build on to my life testimonial before I get going with that. It starts when I was a boy about 8 years old. And I remember at 8 years old, I was outside a lot. In those days, not days of today, my mother would say, go outside and play. I had no brothers or sisters old enough to play with me, and I was going outside to play. I had no toys. I could have went a mile in any direction. No one would have mugged me. I don't think they would want to stole me, but anyway, it just, it was safe. But think about this little kid, 8 years old, what's he going to do out there all by himself, playing? Well, you use your imagination. You create things, and you look at the sky, and you look at the stars, and you listen to the birds, and you watch things. A lot of people don't have that opportunity today. It became apparent to me when I was teaching school. I'd tell them something, huh? They didn't look outside. They don't have any idea about what's out there because they had toys when they went outside. Well, they didn't go outside. They stayed in the house. It seems funny, but you know what? Perhaps it's not so funny. Anyway, as this time it's happened that my father and my grandfather lived the same way as I had. And so when I'd see a certain bird, certain tree, I'd say, what is that, Grandpa? What's that? Yeah. They'd tell me so I could learn in addition to being able to see these things. One famous one, you've probably heard this. Tell me if you have afterwards, okay? I went out to work with my father and grandfather, and it was a Saturday, and I saw this little bird. And it jumped up and ran a little ways and had an orange tail, and it sat there like this with its wing flapping like that. I said, well, that bird's hurt. So I chased after it. Then all of a sudden it could fly a little better, and it got a little further away, and I chased after it again. And so I went back to lunchtime with my granddad and father and said, I saw this bird. And they told him the story, and they said, well, he said, what you need to do is to take some salt from a lunchbox here, and go out and salt its tail, and then you can catch it. Never did catch it, but I spent a lot of time out there. But that's a way to learn too, don't you think? So that's the kind of childhood I had. And many weekends we went down to the Mississippi on Saturday and Sunday, and we spent every weekend there, probably, or most of them, since I was 8 till I was out of high school. And there with my grandfather mostly, and also my younger brother. And so, 20 years of my life or so, I spent going up and down that river. And I learned soon that certain things happened out there by watching direct observation. For example, when a stream flows into the Mississippi, usually the Mississippi has a greater current. And so this turbid water that's coming from the stream hits that more rapid water and it drops its load. It makes a little shallow area of mud. Well, I knew this, and I saw this shallow area developing, and through a few more years, on a dry year, the water, that would be an island. And a few more years, it would be a permanent sandbar all year long. In another year or two, there was grass growing out there. It's a particular kind of grass called rice cut grass, and it's got a sawtooth-like blade. You walk through it, it'll tear your pants apart. And then there was some arrowhead, it's a big long leaf like that, like an arrow along the edge. And then a year or two, willows. Another year or two, cottonwoods. Another year or two, some silver maples. Finally, it was an island 4 to 6 feet above the level of the normal river flow, with pecans and oaks growing on it. It took me about 30 years to see all that. What kind of a perspective would somebody had who had never been on the Mississippi, and they go and they see that island? What if it's a young person? It means nothing to them. Yet from my perspective of all those years, I can see how that developed. In fact, I can go up and down that river and see other islands in various stages, and I say, I know what's going on there. I know what kind of tree is going to come there next. So it's a matter of perspective, I think. All I witnessed through those years can be seen along the river. But someone that hasn't been there does not have that perspective. Now I'm going to admit something here, not often admitted. I'm 81 years old. So besides those islands, I've seen a lot of things in my life. And today I want to share with you many life-changing events in my life, and we'll see what kind of perspective I gain and what kind of perspective you will have afterwards. I started out, like I said, about 8 or 9 years old going to Mississippi, and one particular day I was down there and I was looking for some leeches, and they make bait, fish bait, and it so happened my parents were entertaining another couple that weekend. And I remember this gal's name was Vivian Schallenberger. A nice name. But Vivian was from North Carolina, and she had the sweetest accent. And I was explaining all this to her. I said, now you look for these leeches underneath the wet logs and things. And I picked them up and I said, but some of them are blood-sucking leeches and some of them are not. You don't want to use the blood-sucking kind because the fish are afraid of those, but they'll eat the others. And I was explaining all this to her, and she said, this is an 8-year-old kid. How does he know all this stuff? She said, Terry, y'all, remember she's in Carolina, she said, y'all need to be a teacher someday. And that somehow or other stuck with me, and I kind of thought, you know, she's right. And so I started out on my career to be a teacher. Okay. Well, that was pretty lucky. Maybe just a coincidence. Vivian was there that day to give me that suggestion to start me on my life's journey. And then I looked up in a dictionary, occurrence. Occurrence is defined as a related events by accident. In other words, you're going to get on a jet airplane, and you get up to the desk, and they said, your flight's been canceled. Oh, man, I was going to go to Texas today, so I got to go. Can I get another plane? Yeah, there's another plane, leaves an hour later, okay. So you get it. Later that day, the plane that you were going to be on crashed, and everybody was killed. Oh, wow, that was sure a coincidence. Or the other way around. That was a good coincidence. It's a bad coincidence. That the person that rushed up there and said, you know, I missed my flight and I need a new flight. He said, okay. Put her on the one that crashed. That's a bad coincidence. So there can be good ones and there can be bad ones. It just happened, you know. Or you're unlucky or you're lucky. How fortunate. Well, it began, I guess, next after I'm on my quest for being a teacher in high school. And as a freshman coming into school, you're funneled in with 5 different schools plus the kids from the country. And I looked on the senior hall where all the seniors were, and I see, boy, there's an awful lot of them holding hands and standing like this around a girl at their locker. And I said, they've all got girlfriends. I need a girlfriend. So I looked around in my classes. There's a lot of pretty girls out there. And then my senior class, or excuse me, my freshman class in the afternoon, Miss Della Thompson was teaching community civics. And I looked over, there she was, the one that I think would be a good girl. Like I said, there are many other pretty girls there, but this one caught my eye. Why? I'm just lucky, you know. So I said, I'm going to ask that girl for a date. So I kind of knew from freshman hall where her locker was. So I said, I'm going to go ask her for the roller skating party. So I walked up to her and lost my nerve, and I walked on by. I said, I got to ask this girl out. So and then I walked by again. I said, oh, Terry, you're going to be brave. In the meantime, she's packing her books and getting all ready to go and get on the bus because she's a farm girl. So I walked up and finally, oh my gosh, she turned around and I said, hi, I'm Terry Balding. I didn't do that then because I wasn't bald yet. I am Terry Balding. I said, you know there's a freshman roller skating party. Yes, I know, she said. I said, would you like to go with me? Well, she said, I'll have to check with my parents. You know, that's a dodge. You're gone now. You don't get that date. So the next day I come up to her and I said, what did your parents say? She said, okay, I'll meet you there. Little did I know. Now, this is a little story about Nancy. She's kind of a liar in a way. She went home to her mom and dad and she said, Mom, Dad, there's a freshman roller skating party. Could you take me? That's it. That's all she told them. Didn't tell them about the little boy that asked her if she was going to meet there. They had no clue. So she didn't really lie. She just didn't tell them everything. So we skated, and it was wonderful. And I enjoyed that time I was with her. I didn't feel uncomfortable. Then I said, you know what? There's a senior class play coming up in December. This is September. In December, there's a senior class play. I'll ask her to that. Bill Hubbard asked her before I got there. In about a few days after I dated her, you know, whole 3 months ahead. And I was so mad at that girl. She's my girl. What's he doing? I was mad at her and was mad at him. I said, forget her. Find another one. So I looked around and I asked another girl. In fact, I didn't really get along very well with that girl. She wanted to kind of ask me questions that she thought, do you like hunting, you know, and what have you hunted? And she doesn't hunt. What's she asking me? She's pumping me for all this stuff. She's just trying to carry on a conversation, be nice. I didn't like that. So then I asked another girl, I think about my sophomore year, and it was Nancy. And I got along just fantastic. I just loved every minute I was with her. And then somebody else dated her. I said, doggone that girl. I gave up on her. And I asked another girl. And she was so shy, I had to do all the talking. And I didn't like that. So came our junior year. I said, Nancy, will you go with me? Yes, I'll go with you. So she went with me to the junior class play. And I loved every minute of it. And somebody else asked her. I said, doggone that girl. So I asked another girl. Didn't get along with her. Just she talked and she's kind of bossy and I didn't like her. So come our senior year and I asked her on a date, Nancy that is. She went and went again another date or two. Things got pretty hot. As a matter of fact, in October I said, would you go steady with me? In those days, you took a ring or something, exchanged it, and you wore it on a necklace around you. It's kind of like, I'm dating someone. Said everybody, keep off the field, you know. And then finally in our senior years, I said, well, I'm going to school at Western Illinois University. She said, I'm going to U of I. And I said, okay. I said, we probably should dissolve this relationship then, and I'll give you back your ring. You can have mine. And I said, I sure love you a lot, and hate to see you going there, but I just don't think we could carry on a romance over miles like that. She said, yeah, I suppose. Well, it was a little bit later on, she said, I'm going Western. She made a good decision, don't you think? So anyway, she decides to go to Western, and her parents were not too happy about that. You going to U of I? What happened to that? Well, I decided I'd like to go to Western and be in home ec. Oh, you're not going to fool around down there and play because Harry's going down there. No, I'm going to be serious about my studies. In fact, she did get excellent grades, better than mine. So then we started off to Western, and in that time period where we were going to school, we became engaged, and then after we graduated, she went to teaching school in high school in Augusta, Illinois, not Wisconsin. And I went to work on my master's thesis. Eventually, we were married during that junior year of our college career. But in the meantime, I was on my career for teaching, if you'll recall. So I ended up with an advisor whose name was Dr. Hank Sather. Dr. Sather was a great mentor for me and influenced my life very greatly. And he told me when he found out I was in teaching, he said, while you're teaching, he said, you should probably just go ahead and get your master's thesis. Under me, of course. I said, well, of course, you teach wildlife and all those things I'm excited about, so I'll be happy to do that. So I started off on my master's thesis. But getting back to the teaching, in the last year of your senior year, you have to do student teaching. So I was a student teacher in the classroom in biology. And there were these two boys in class. And they were terrors. In fact, one of them's name was Mike Ward. He was later arrested for knifing a guy. And he was about this tall. And he had a PE class. And in that class was a guy that lived across the hall from me in the dorms. And he was on the football team. He was 6'8", big gorilla. And he was telling these kids how to play this game, and Mike wouldn't cooperate. So I finally went over and he says, Mike, if you do that again, he said, you're going to be in big trouble. Mike said, yeah. So Mike did it again. So he went over and he said, Mike, what did I say? Mike doubled up his fist and swung at him to hit him in the face. Trouble was he wasn't tall enough. He missed because his chin was up about that much higher. That's Mike. The last day of class, Mike came to me and he said, Mr. Balding, you know, you and I haven't got along very well. I said, no, you got that right. Well, he said, would you like to get even with me? I said, what do you mean? He said, we can meet after school tonight and we'll fight. I don't think so, Mike. But you know what? It told me if I was a high school teacher, sorry, Brian, I give you great credit though. If I was a high school teacher, it wouldn't be long before I'd throw somebody like Mike Ward through the window from the 3rd floor. I said, I can't take this. I can't be a high school teacher. I thought I was going to be a teacher, but I can't do this. Dr. Sisler, well, why don't you, Dr. Sisler said, why don't you go and get your PhD and you can teach in college? Oh, well, that's an idea. PhD, though, that sounds pretty serious. Yeah, but he said, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it. That's Dr. Sather for you. So I did, started out. Well, about that time, I'm about done, Henry. No, that's not true. About that time, I don't know what happened. Oh, here it is. I don't know where I am on my notes here. That's not one I wanted. About that time, we had our first child. When I was working on my master's thesis, her name was Sherry. Subsequently, we moved to Ohio. I'll tell you about that later. And Nancy had a miscarriage. And I suspect many of you women have probably had miscarriages. It seems to be actually a fairly common thing. But it's never something common to the woman. It's something very destroying to them. It really, really bothers them a lot. It never particularly bothered me. I don't know if that's the case for the man or not, but I didn't get that upset about it. But Nancy was really distraught. And then she had another miscarriage. And then she was distraught again. And of course, like I said, I didn't really feel that much about it, but nevertheless, it was a serious time in her life. We both began to think, will we ever have any more children? And the last time that she had the pregnancy was actually kind of a cancer of the uterus that just enveloped the embryo. And to find that out, they had to take an injection of blood, withdrawal of blood from her, and they checked for a hormone that hydatidiform mole kicks out. It's a very high level of estrogen. That's how they know it's not a pregnancy, because it's a much higher level than normal. So they were monitoring this after the miscarriage. And the doctor came in and he said, your estrogen levels are still pretty high. They should have come down after that hydatidiform mole's there. He said, could you be pregnant? I don't know. Do you have a husband? Yes, you could be pregnant then. And she was. So we had our second daughter, Lori. Well then, going back to the schooling, when I was making my choice with Dr. Sather, he said, you should go to the University of Michigan. Or, boo, Ohio State University. You know, those two are enemies. And I said, okay, so I applied to Michigan, University of Michigan, and to the Ohio State University, and I got a note back from Dr. Chase from the University of Michigan. He said, yes, we would like to have you come here and study on deer, which is what I'd been studying on. And he said, we can give you a scholarship, an assistantship, where you'll have to do these various things we have for you to do, work, in other words. I said, okay. And then Ohio State called. They said, hey, we'd like you to come here. I said, oh, that's great. I said, and they said, we are going to give you a fellowship. And I said, so what does that mean? He said, well, a fellowship means you just get paid money. You don't have to do any work for it. You just have to do your studies and your research. Boy, it sounded like a better deal because you could spend all your time in research and also your classes, and you wouldn't have to worry about other work. So I went to Ohio State. Pretty fortunate, I guess, because they let me through. I got a PhD, and then we decided that we needed to go to some school for me to teach. So I tried around the country, and UW-Eau Claire had an opening, and I applied. And there was also a school in southern Minnesota that was a state-sponsored school, and they offered me a contract as well as UW-Eau Claire. And somehow or other, when I went to UW-Eau Claire and interviewed, I said, this is the place. This is where I want to be. Later, about a couple years later, the one at Minnesota closed. So I was pretty lucky I got in there. Pretty coincidental that I was able to get in at UW-Eau Claire. While I was teaching at UW-Eau Claire, I've had again that I would like to do some more research. So I started looking into it, and I wrote a grant. I submitted it. It was rejected. And so I went over to the office, the graduate office, and I said, why was my research rejected? They said, I can't tell you why it was rejected. I can tell you how you can make it better. I guess I didn't see the real difference there, but he told me some things to make it better. And I said, what? He said, you needed more literature cited. Other people have done work, what they've been doing in that area. I said, you can't put literature in something that's never been done. This is the first one. I mean, this is rock bottom here. This is the first time this has ever been done or tried. There's no literature out there on that. Well, I said, who was on that committee? So-and-so over in art, who wouldn't know anything about literature cited. So-and-so over in music, who wouldn't know anything. So-and-so in sociology, so-and-so in history, so-and-so in biology. Biology, did you say? Yes. Well, who was this person in biology? Well, such and such. I said, he's in fish behavior, and my research was going to be on fish behavior. Hello? So where do you suppose it came from on that committee that Terry didn't have enough, it wasn't good enough? My own department, my buddy stabbed me in the back. Never did get along with that man, ever, before or after that. So I said, as long as he's here, and he only came a year or two ahead of me, as long as he's here, he's going to block me every time I want to do something. Research is out the window. Just teach. Some years later, I got into research, and I loved it. We did all the clams, my wife and I, all the clams on the Mississippi River the Chippewa River from the beginning with the Mississippi clear up to the mouth, all the major tributaries, we were there. We went down them all. That was lots of fun. I loved it. It was a valuable contribution. In fact, I don't mean to brag on it. All this may sound like I'm bragging or prideful, and I'm not. I'm just telling you my story, my perspective. And anyway, the DNR head person in clams wrote me a letter recently. She said, thanks to you, we have a very good handle of what clams are on the Chippewa River Basin. So it was a kind of a complimentary letter from the top person in the state. So I'm pretty pleased with that. So that was my research. I loved the research. I loved the teaching. And I always held that against that guy because he'd kept me from it all those years. And one day I was having coffee with a guy. This is a very studious kind of guy. He's drinking his coffee, and I'm complaining about this guy, how he's always blocked my way. He'd retired then. And this guy said, well, Terry, did you ever think that because you didn't get to research, you got to spend all that time with your family? I dropped my cup of coffee. What? Yeah, that's right. What a coincidence. Pretty lucky. So I got to do research, and I still got to be with my family. Then when I first got there, that was the other bad thing about UW-Eau Claire. They asked me to teach embryology. And they asked me to teach anatomy and physiology. Well, it wasn't that I wasn't trained. I'd had courses in embryology. I'd had all kinds of courses in anatomy and physiology. I'd done a lot of research that involved animal physiology and anatomy. And so I was very familiar with it. But, I like, give me the stars and the islands and the birds. That's what I want. No, you got to teach this stuff. Ugh. So about 1 year later, I'm saying, maybe this is not a good idea. Maybe I ought to move. 2 years later, 3 years, 4, 5, I'm going to quit. And he said, you know what, there's this other class that's coming up. So eventually I did end up teaching animal behavior and ornithology, which I loved. I think it is important in life to love your work. Get up in the morning and be happy you're going to work. A big part of your life, until you retire or get tired of it, is your job. It's important. Second most important thing, more important than the first, is your wife. If you can't go home at night and be happy because your wife is there, where are you? Very important decision in your life. I was pretty lucky, or maybe it was just a coincidence. While we were in Eau Claire, our first year, we couldn't find a place to stay. And I need to go back just a little bit to when we were living in Ohio and I was doing my research. I had completed all my coursework, so I wanted to go up and find a study area, and I did. It was about 30 miles north of Columbus, where we lived, in an apartment building. And it was still 10 miles on further north to the study area. And so we thought, well, we'd like to move closer, because that's all I'm doing is research. No, of course, I don't have to be at the university. So we moved closer, but we were looking for a farm. And the reason we were looking for a farm is because Nancy grew up on a farm. And I had been outside a lot, and I thought that'd be nice. So we were looking for a farm. We found this apartment. And this is what the ad said: apartment free. Ooh, does that catch the eye or an ear of a college student who doesn't have any money? We didn't have any money. So we went up and we interviewed. And they said, this is where you're going to stay. It's a separate house from their house. Dave, this has got to find my mansion-like house. They said, this is your house over there. And I said, oh, that's a pretty nice looking house. Free, yeah, free. I said, what do we have to do for that? Free. He said, well, you have to watch our kids. 2 kids. I said, oh, wait a minute. Ooh. What age are these kids? Well, have all of you have grandchildren or children, you've been around children, you know that there can be 2 kids that are really pills, right? And when would they ask you to go and do this? Would they say, we're going out tonight, we'll be gone until 2 in the morning. You watch the kids. But you get the apartment free. I don't know if we want to wait until midnight. And what about on Sunday? Well, we go to church, you stay here and watch the kids. I mean, can you see how this might be a big problem? And we started saying, ooh, wait a minute, whoa. Well, we'll think about it. Then we left. On the way back, he said, man, free, what were we thinking? So I said, I'm going to call him back and tell him how Nancy's in home economics, of all things. If she's had kids of her own, we know all about this. We're the perfect people for you. And I called him back, hello, we need that apartment. This is Terry and Nancy, we just talked to you. Yeah, it's rented. That was a bad coincidence. But then I was driving around the study area one day, and I passed this old house, and here's this old house. And I said, nobody's living in there. So I inquired around who owned that house. Farmer down the road owns it. So I went and asked him. I said, hello. I said, my name's Terry Balding, and I see there's a house down there I told that you own, and I was wondering if you'd consider renting it. Well, I was thinking on turning it down, but I guess I could rent it. I said, well, how much would you like for the rent? He said, $50 a month. By the way, in those times, I was paying over $100 for the apartment. Just an apartment. This is a house. I said, well, that's a good deal. So he said, sure. He said, move in. So we moved in, and we were there for a couple years, and we were really happy there. We had chickens, and we had ducks, and we had a little garden. We loved it there. He said, you and I, Nancy, we should live on a farm eventually. So when we got to Ohio State, we got to UW-Eau Claire, we said, we need to be on a farm. But we couldn't find anything, so we started looking in the newspapers. Nothing. Oh, there's one. No, we called him up. Hello, rented already. Sold already. Rented already. How is it all these people are getting ahead of us on these? We call up right away as soon as we get the paper, and it's already rented. Somebody said, well, you know, they're probably picking them up from the paper office about 2 or 3 hours ahead of when you get them at your door. Oh, so we checked it out. Sure enough, there's a farm. And we called up and said, yeah, come on out. So we come out. Mom's gone, but I'm here. Okay. So she comes home, and we drive down there, and the grass is about that tall. There's beer cans, bottles, old kids' toys, wagons, pitchforks, shovels, junk of all kinds, broken glass, everything. The house is in shambles. I said, we want it. She said, she knew I was teaching at the university. Oh, you wouldn't want that. I said, oh, yeah, we want that. It was kind of down in, away from everything, and when you come home, you were like in another world. I said, this is the place we got to have. No paint on it, by the way. So I said, well, I'd like to rent it. Oh, I don't think you should. Well, yeah, we want it. Well, okay. $100 a month, which was really good for a whole house, again. So we spent almost a whole year cleaning that thing up. And I asked the guy, I said, if I buy the paint and paint it, would you let me paint it? Yeah, so we painted it. And we did this and that. We fixed and fixed and fixed and fixed. And finally had kind of a decent kind of a place to stay. And then the next year it came up for sale. They didn't ask us, do you want to buy it? They didn't ask us. They didn't tell us it was for sale. Some woman came and knocked on the door. I want to look at your house. And Nancy said, what do you mean look at our house? She said, well, it's for sale, and I want to buy it, and I want to look at it first. Well, you can't come in here. I haven't been told anything about this. So I came home that night, and she told me all about this. And I said, let's go up and tell them we want it. Do you want it? She said, no. What? This is what we want, honey. No. Honey. Okay. So we go up, we get it, and we bought it. We always thought when we were out there on that little farm in Ohio, you know, a couple acres and a cow, you know, maybe a pig, some chickens, and a little garden, maybe a couple acres of land. Well, it turned out to be 193 acres and 35 cows and over 100 pigs and lots of chickens and ducks and geese. It was everything we ever wanted and more. Pretty lucky, I think. Just a coincidence, probably. Now, I lost a page I need here. Now, what happened next, I was at my office teaching one of those good classes like ornithology, birds. And a phone rang, and it said, this is the police department. I went, uh-oh. He said, your wife has had an accident in the home. And they said, they are there with the emergency squad, and they are stabilizing her. I said, stabilizing? That sounds pretty serious if you're not stable. You know, I said, what's wrong? Well, we can't say, but she wants you to meet her at the hospital. Oh, okay. So I have no idea what's wrong, but they're stabilizing. I'm scared to death. That's So I drive over to the hospital. Her eyes are about this big. And I see her on this gurney, and the legs are all cut to pieces. There was a glass cage about like this we got, and there was a window over, and she decided to wash them. So she got up in a chair and got up there like this on her knees. And that's what happened. Wait a minute. There. She's washing the windows. Guess what? The glass broke. Can you imagine going through glass with your knees like that? And then you're down in there like this. How do you get out with all that glass all around you? Needless to say, she cut herself all to pieces. She went from the back porch to the bathroom and called 911, and that's how they called me. And then they went to the hospital with her, and I got in there, and I could see it wasn't going to take her life, but the doctor said after by the way, this doctor happened to be a neighbor of ours, and he fixed her up, and he said, she'll be okay, but he said, that close, Maxwell Smart, that close to cutting a major artery and dying. Coincidence. Just the way it happened. Anyway, she was okay. And then one day I was out rolling around with my tractor, and I know better than this, but I got on a hill like this, and all of a sudden looked over here, and a tire was coming off the ground like that. And said, oh no, I'm going to roll my tractor. So rolled over like that down the hill a couple times, landed on its right side up, started driving up the hill. In the meantime, I was thrown off, and I remember sitting on the tractor seat. Oh no, it's happening to me. I hear this all the time. Every year, some guy gets rolled on his tractor, kills him. Next thing I know, I'm on the ground looking up. And here comes this big wheel. And I said, I'm alive. Where's the blood? Where's no guts hanging out? Hey, I believe I'm all right, but I got to go shut the tractor off. So I go shut the tractor off. I go to the hospital. And when I'm in the hospital, Nancy says, he just rolled his tractor on him. He's rolled his tractor. And the nurses grab me down the hall, code 2, code 2. And I'm in and up in the hospital room on the bed, and the lights are all shining, just like on the TV programs. And all these heads around here talking to me about what's this and what's that. And they're poking him here and putting tape there and thumping on me. And this guy says, this is going to hurt a little bit. And he had a needle about that long. I said, yeah. And he went right in here. And I said, what's going on? And the guy on the other end of me, by my feet, he takes off my shoes and socks, takes a pair of scissors, everything off. There I am, laying on the table just like this. And over here, one of these little girls over here said, you're Dr. Balding, and I had you in my biology class. And over here, I said, yeah, me too. There was absolutely no dignity left whatsoever. I don't care what I show to anybody anymore. I mean, I've already experienced the worst it could do. So all these things happen to you. And, but fortunately, I survived it. I had a collapsed lung and no broken bones. And I lived. I thought that was a pretty nice coincidence, don't you think? Well, anyway, then came the worst thing. Nancy, well, not the worst, but pretty close. Nancy wasn't feeling good. We went to the hospital. And they x-rayed her, and MRI'd, and CAT scan, and all that stuff. And the doctor came in and sat down with us and said, he said, you have a mass. You cannot, unless this has happened to you, cannot understand how that affects you when a mass. Boom! Oh my goodness, the world is coming to an end. I mean, it's terrible. What do you mean a mass? He said, cancer. Well, I didn't say cancer. Cancer. Where is it? He said, the omentum. Now, most of you probably won't recognize the word omentum, but the The omentum is a membrane that we have here over our intestines. It's laced with fat. And it's a kind of a crazy place for cancer to start. But that's where it started for her. So anyway, as we're finding this out, they said, we can treat that right here in Eau Claire. Or you can go over to Rochester. I looked at her and she looked at me and said, Rochester. So we went to Rochester. Why? Well, because coincidental, I guess, or maybe we just thought Rochester's the headquarters for Mayo. They ought to have somebody over there know something. It turns out we were pretty lucky. The guy that we got for the cancer doctor is the one that treats this particular kind of cancer, and he's seen 50 cases like that per year, all in women 60, and she was a woman, and 60. And later on, I talked to the doctors back here in Eau Claire, and I told them that she had mental cancer, and they said, what? I never heard of that. We made a good choice going to Mayo. Well, then the worst came, and that's when Nancy fell. We don't know when she fell. She doesn't know when she fell. She doesn't remember where or what. But I see a strange behavior on her. She's putting on her underwear backward, both feet in the same leg. And I'm saying, wait a minute, you're not doing that right. Yes, I am. She became defiant. And I said, honey, you're putting on your underwear wrong. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No. I looked at her and said, you okay? Yeah. I can see it. Something said inside me, she's not okay. So I battled with her and got her underwear on right and got her dressed. And she just kept getting worse. I said, we got to go to the hospital. So we go to the hospital. And first thing they do there is they put you in that gown, the gown that's open in the back. Don't worry about it. I don't have any dignity left anyway. So they put it on. And as they're taking off her sweater, there's a big, huge bruise here about the size of a baseball. It's very intense, so it's been done a day or two. And the nurse looked at me with this evil eye. She said, how did she get that bruise? I.e., did you hit her? That's what she's thinking. And I'm seeing what she's thinking. I'm saying, I don't know how she got it, but I didn't do it. So then we go on down with the gown and getting on. Here's another bruise on her left breast, and on her side over here, and on her leg, and her fingers jammed, and her toes black and blue. So I got off from the nurse. She was off my case then. We'd see if she's got a problem. And she said, I got to go to the bathroom. Okay, so she walked to the bathroom by herself. Later in all this MRIs and x-rays and doctors and nurses, they said, I got to go to the bathroom. So she can't walk. So they take her to the bathroom. Later, they're saying, Nancy, what day is it? Well, it's Thursday. Well, okay. Who's the president? All those kind of questions. See if you're with it. And she answered some of them, and some of them she didn't. And they keep asking her. Every doctor comes in, every nurse comes in, same questions all over. Pretty soon it's no answers. She didn't know anything. Pretty soon her eyes closed, and she was comatose. And they sent her to ICU. And there at ICU, she was in there for 10 days comatose. And family would come in, my daughters, my son, grandchildren would come in and look at her. And, Nancy, do you hear us? Squeeze her hand if you can tell. No squeeze. Blink your eyes. No. Do you hear me? Just nothing. You're crying every day. You go home in bed at night, there's nobody there, just you. You could say I was distraught. And then one day, we were in there. She said, Nancy? Ooh, she opened her eyes. She said, hey, hello, everybody. She opened her eyes. And then they rolled over this way, unnaturally. But when they were staring at the ceiling with no life. I don't know how you can do this. You can look at a person and tell them if they're listening to you or not. You can look at their eyes and they're not listening to me. You can tell when they're out there right now, you can tell if you're listening or not. You can tell if there's no life there. You can tell they're dead. Their eyes, it's just something about your eyes are really important in reading about people. And we knew She's not right, even though her eyes were open. She didn't know her name. She didn't respond. She just rolled her eyes over there. Sorry for talking about you, honey. Well, she, of course, doesn't remember any of this. The doctor happened to be there. It was in the head of the neurology department. He said, she's having a seizure. He said, I'm calling in the expert in our department on seizures. And they had already done the EEG to see if she had a seizure or anything. No, negative. But the doctor that had the seizure, the doctor that was really an expert in seizures came in. He said, well, they just did that for 6 hours. We need to do that for 24 hours or so. In that time period, they discovered 7 seizures. So now we put her on seizure medicine. And she gets a UT, a urinary tract infection in the meantime. So they put her on an antibiotic, and then she gets allergic to the antibiotic. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I said, I'm never going to get my wife. And at the beginning of this, I should have told you one other thing important, too. They said, you know, your wife is comatose, and if she vomits, she'll choke on it, and it'll go down her lungs. She'll die. You've got to put tubes in her if you want her to have a chance. But she said she didn't want to have tubes. She didn't want to prolong her life. I and my children wrestled for hours. First, one of us would say, well, we got to put them in. The other one would say, no, we don't. And then one of the other would say, yeah, I think we should. No, the other one, no. We waffled. All of us waffled back and forth several times. And finally, we all said, yeah, we did. That was the right decision. Sure, a coincidence. Well, 41 days later, she's out of the hospital. She's here today. Pretty lucky. But do you see what I'm adding up to? Event after event after event after event after event for 81 years of my life. Major events, life-changing events. Just a coincidence, just happened. Vivian Schellenberger, you remember her? That I chose my wife Nancy. That I decided not student teaching in high school. That Dr. Sather should send me on to PhD. We had miscarriages. I chose Ohio State. I chose UW-Eau Claire. We found just the right apartment. We found just the right home. We found a farm. I chose UW-Eau Claire over Minnesota. That's for you Gophers. I was unhappy teaching my courses. I had enemies in the department. I didn't get to do research. We looked for a home for a long time. We had cancer. We had a rollover tractor. We had Nancy falling through the glass. We have Nancy falling in her head. One last thing I didn't tell you about. When we first moved to Eau Claire and were in an apartment looking for that farm, we said, well, we got to go to church. Well, where will we go? Well, you know, there's a church over here only 3 blocks away. We could walk. Okay, so we went over there. Our dentist at that time was named Dr. Bowen. I was trying to think of his name last night, but I got it today, Dr. Bowen. Dr. Bowen was our dentist. We'd been to him several times. And I see Dr. Bowen's in this church. And, oh, that's nice. I'll go say hi to him. And I see some of my colleagues from the biology department there also. And I started saying hi to all of my colleagues, and I went over to Dr. Bowen and I said, well, how you doing, Tom, or whatever his name was. She said, you call me Dr. Bowen. Oh. Out with that church. How can you have that kind of an attitude and be a Christian? I mean, their history. Phone book, find another church. Well, here's the Christian church over here at Pomona Drive. Let's go there. Clear over on the other side of town. That was this church before we moved, before we changed our name to Cornerstone. And when I walked in that door and sat in that congregation, one lady there was snipping her fingernails. Dr. Bowen would never do that. I mean, there is a difference between that church that we went to and this church. These were people, real Christians. Those people over there were going to church. There is a difference. It was during this time that we were singing a song, and Marion Kane was the preacher at that time, that I was standing up singing, and I said, you know, Terry, you're kind of seesaw with your faith. You're just kind of like going along with, you know, you're going there, you're in church, you're a good boy. You need to stand up, Terry, and make a real commitment to this, 100%. No going back. And I did. I had become a Christian many years earlier. When I was a boy, about 12 years old, I was baptized into Christ. And I was going to church, but I really wasn't going to church. You know what I mean? But now I decided I'm going to church. And I have ever since. Pretty lucky. So all these coincidences, where does that lead us? Leads us to Acts 2:38. Each of you must repent of your sins and turn to God and be baptized into Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of sin. Then you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. There you go. I have the Holy Spirit. Now there are many scriptures. I didn't care to put them all on there, but there are many scriptures that tell us that when we have the Spirit, we can be led by the Spirit if we follow Him. If we're following Christ, we are led by the Spirit. Now tell me about all those Vivian Schellenbergers and Southern. Tell me about all those coincidences, just lucky, just happened. Friends, let's see the truth. From my perspective, it couldn't just happen that way. I had to be led by the Spirit. There is a God. Nahum saw it. The Japanese girl saw it. I even saw it on television the other night. A guy got up there and they said, this guy's a hero because this woman fell off the pier in Lake Superior up at Duluth. And her dog was in there and she was trying to get the dog and the dog was drowning and the woman was drowning. Help, I can't swim. He was surfboarding nearby and he heard the woman. And he got over there and he rescued her and then she went back into the water and got the dog, got them all out safe and he was a hero. And they asked him, what do you think about this? And he said, well, there were a lot of circumstances here. A lot of things happened. He said, I know it was from God. There you go. Your life, if you want to follow Christ, will lead you. I'm telling you from 81 years of perspective, will lead you to happiness. But I was getting this sermon ready to go, and I said, you know, there's another lesson here that I missed, that I wasn't going to share you because I didn't know it. I learned myself something in this sermon. This is what I learned. Most all of the joyous blessings that I had in my life were preceded by some kind of problems or difficulties. If you think about it, research, think about farmhouses, think about all those things. Many of them were, something was happening ahead of it. Nancy went in a coma. Something bad and then something good. It occurred to me that all these blessings were followed by joyous blessings. They are training for me and for you for the one last great lesson. Life can be tough, but God is good and is saving the best for last. Next slide. Way past time, so I'm just going to quit with this slide. We'll have to get to it. That's it right there. Folks, there is a God. My life is a testimony. Nahum believed it. The Japanese girl believed it. The guy on the television, you see it on the NFL football games. They quick take the camera away so you can't see they're praying. There is a God. He's present. He'll lead you. If you already know Christ, and most of you do, you know that. If you're not in Christ, or you haven't made that firm commitment that I made, you can still do it. Remember this, to be truly glad, there is wonderful joy ahead, even though you have to endure many trials, which I did, and you do, and you will, only for a little while. And then what? The best for last.